Chaska City Planning Commission, May 9th. Roll call, please.
Bovee. Cross. Here. Dalkey.
Here.
Kelly. Keyport.
Here.
Pfeiffer.
Here.
And Chairperson Wong.
Here. So before we get started, everyone, please adjust your microphones. Make sure that we have a good audio for everyone. And also just note to the audience, if you do approach the podium, please make sure to speak into the microphone because this is all recorded and broadcast. I think it's also posted to YouTube at some point for future reference for anyone who wants to see it later. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
Yep. Move we adopt the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Dalkey, second by Pfeiffer. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now is the time in the agenda for the visitor presentation, where anyone who would like to speak to something not already on the agenda is welcome to approach the podium. So I'll give a moment here. Okay. So we'll move on to the minutes from the April 11th Planning Commission meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review said minutes?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion by Keyport, second by Cross. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Has everyone had a chance to review the consent agenda?
Yes.
So that would include the final plat for Club West 7th Edition, Traditions Development, the final plat for Chaska Creek Center 2nd Edition Community Asset Development, and the final plat and site building for Aldi, Chipotle, and Starbucks in Hazeltine Plaza. You all good?
Yep.
Any comments before we move on?
Move to adopt the consent agenda?
I'll second that.
Motion by Pfeiffer, second by Dalkey. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Noted opposed by Cross. Motion carries. Okay. So now we have item number 7 on the agenda. Approved concept plan for Sagewood and Clover Ridge Drive, D.R. Horton.
Thank you, members of the Planning Commission. We're looking at a concept plan request tonight for the Sagewood development requested by D.R. Horton. So to give you a visual of where the site is located, it's adjacent to the Clover Ridge development that is north of County Road 10, also known as Engler Boulevard, and then west of the Clover Ridge development where it steps off now. Here's a more zoomed in perspective. So we're looking at the extensions of Clover Preserve Lane on the north end there, and then Cloverfield Circle on the south end. So in terms of what they're requesting tonight, it will be for a concept plan for 58 single-family lots. In terms of how this use fits in with the comprehensive plan, it does meet the guidance out there for low-density residential, as well as the Clover Ridge concept plan that was approved in 2004. So the existing conditions of the site is in total approximately 28 acres. They basically sanctioned it off in 2 different areas as they look at the site. So they have the north area kind of looking at the extension of Clover Preserve Lane, and then the south area that looks at the Clover Ridge Circle area. And then in terms of what's existing on site, so a majority of it is open farmland as it's being used today, but there's also very significant area of trees on the north end that has been growing there for years and years and years. So that'll be a big item that we'll be looking at tonight in terms of how that development fits in. Another piece just to keep in mind with this development, and as it abuts the business park area to the south, is that there is a 300-foot buffer on the south end that they've delineated and will show to remain as part of this development. Another item to point out right away is that with the size of their site, they will be required to dedicate 2.8 acres of their site for parkland dedication, and that is either in a cash escrow or a deeding of land for it, or a mixture of both. So I want to kind of go over some pictures of portions of the site as we see it today. So specifically, these pictures that you're looking at now is on the north edge of the site, basically where there's an opening between the grove of trees up there. So specifically, I'm going to go back to this aerial. We're looking at this open area in between those groves of trees, and how you kind of see it butting up against those existing homes on Sophia Drive. So just kind of understanding what the spatial characteristics are over there. These are additional photos that kind of in that same general area on the north edge. And then we've also provided a couple photos taken from other areas in the Clover Ridge development, just to give you an idea of how you can see those groves of trees from different areas. So the top left one is taken from Mark Twain Drive, looking westerly. And then we have the one on the top right looking west from Clover Ridge Drive across the pond there. And then another photo a little bit more zoomed in of that same perspective looking from Mark Twain Drive, and where you can see those groves of trees. And then another perspective a little closer to the site looking westerly from Clover Preserve Drive. So here's the site plan that they've proposed for their concept plan. And like I've stated before, they're proposing 58 lots as a part of this. So 48 lots are situated on the north side off of Clover Preserve Lane. They've shown a couple cul-de-sacs stubbing off of that extension as well. And then 14 lots are proposed on the south side, ending in a cul-de-sac for Cloverfield Circle. So again, these streets here are stubbed off today with the anticipation that this area would be developing. So it's just basically showing the extension of that into this new neighborhood. In terms of what they are proposing, so as you can see tonight with the proposal, you don't see any additional parkland or playground space for this neighborhood, and something that's definitely worth mentioning, especially with some of the concerns that have been brought up by the neighbors out there, the Jonathan Association, and what staff can also reiterate as well is how they're going to be providing amenities for their residents, or if they're going to opt to be a part of the Jonathan Association. So I believe they're considering one or the other options as they're moving forward with their proposal. Staff would just encourage and require that the developer basically determine what their option is by preliminary, whether they provide their own playground space and opt out of the Jonathan Association, or they opt into the Jonathan Association to help pay for some of the existing facilities out there that the existing residents and association maintains. Another item of note is just the home styles that they're planning out there. So you'll see a lot of the two-story, and then I believe they're offering a single-story format as well. So in terms of how it fits in with the existing homes out there, it's not much far off than what you see today. So getting back to that tree preservation point for this site being a big discussion item with the large grove of trees on the north end here. I'm showing the developer's tree preservation plan on this first slide here, indicating where they're planning to preserve some of the trees. So in the bolded squiggly line on the northeast and on the northwest portions of the site, they are showing some tree preservation areas. And then, you know, going back to that item of that openness between this site and the existing Clover Ridge neighborhood to the north, understanding kind of the spatial characteristics between this site and the site to the north, having some significant landscaping and buffering is going to have to be addressed in their preliminary submittal in some way, shape, or form. to provide a buffer in between those two neighborhoods. I've also included two of the drawings that were provided in your staff report, just in terms of how staff analyzes the site with what trees are proposed on there. So we've kind of taken our own liberty to kind of highlight the significant trees on the site, so the oaks and maples, as they're highlighted in the red dots. Kind of hard to see on this slide, but basically the darker dots that you see on this. And then going a little bit further and circling in blue, kind of the more significant sized maples and oaks on site with the blue color. So we kind of laid out a couple ways of looking at this, because just by looking at this graphic, it's really hard to understand kind of where the pattern areas are or where the significant areas are to make sense of a practical layout. So we've kind of highlighted a couple different options in terms of how the developer can continue to look at this as they move forward with their plan. So one of the options, or a couple of the options that were listed, were more geared towards the design considerations for the site and how they can incorporate more tree preservation into the overall design. So that could be looking at pulling down the preservation lines that they showed today a little bit further to incorporate a couple more trees, or several more trees, I should say, to really bolster that tree preservation effort. Another option or consideration we mentioned to the applicant is looking at where they can incorporate significant trees in perhaps the cul-de-sac design and a median. We've done that before in one other development that was done successfully and really made for a unique site overall. So those are a couple options in terms of looking at the design component of tree preservation. Another option was looking at land conveyance to the city. Specifically the northeast area. We saw a huge potential in that being able to be deeded to the city, which would have that long-term preservation of that area that could also count towards parkland credit. So that is an option that they can consider in terms of different areas on the site for to be deeded to the city to own and maintain and ensure that it remains protected. The other option, which is kind of in between the other two, is having a tree preservation easement over the trees that are planned to be preserved. And this has been done in other developments before, like Cortina Woods, in Chaska, so definitely an option to consider as well, to do that over everything that they plan to preserve, and that would be over private property and an understanding and recorded document against the properties that have tree preservation assigned to them to ensure perpetual preservation of those trees. So that's kind of how we've laid it out for the applicant to consider looking into as they move forward. Again, tree preservation is pretty significant and important on this site, and we want to make sure that they're continuing to progress in that area and show maximized ability of preserving those trees over there. A couple of other things that I want to mention is they did hold a neighborhood meeting before this Planning Commission meeting. That was on May 1st to really get people's feedback who are in the general vicinity of the project area. So they've come back to us with a sum of concerns and questions that were brought up by the residents out there, and that mentions or takes into account the tree preservation and screening out there on the north side, whether or not they're going to be a part of the Jonathan Association, providing their own park and playground area, drainage concerns on the north end there, and probably other parts of the site as well, and how construction traffic is going to be handled as this development gets built up. So those were their main concerns. They might be able to state a couple more tonight in addition to that, but that's kind of the sum of the meeting that they had on May 1st. And then also a supplement that was provided to you on your in front of your chairs was a letter from the Jonathan Association, just based on their overall concerns. And again, it kind of gets back to that item of whether or not they're going to be a part of the Jonathan Association, and their concerns about the development providing their own park. I think their concern was more that the developer should provide their own park. So I just want to make mention of those as those were brought up and applicable to this project tonight. But I think in terms of where they're at with the concept plan and what they've been able to hear from concerned neighbors, we have no doubt that they're going to be able to address those concerns as they move forward to their preliminary. So with that, we are asking you to make a motion tonight to recommend approval of the concept plan with the listed conditions in your staff report.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Any questions for Liz? So I have a couple of questions I'd like to field about specifically around Jonathan. So reading this letter here, and I'd like to get some clarity on this. Based on the letter that we received, it states, and I'll just read it for the benefit of the audience members who don't have this in front of them. It says, Jonathan is not on the title. As you know, our articles of incorporation do not allow us to annex new property without a vote of 2/3 of the homeowners. I realize that a past board working through attorney at the time worked with the city to get Jonathan on the title for Clover Ridge neighborhoods, resulting in lawsuits filed by Traditions at Clover Ridge and the Clover condo building. They indicate that the annexation was illegal according to documents. Jonathan won the lawsuits because of property estoppel. And then the residents have been receiving services for 7 years. Jonathan's on the title when the properties are purchased, but at the cost of the association were $230,000 in legal fees to defend such action. The board has no interest in making the same mistake twice. So it seems to indicate that the Jonathan Association, in order to a couple things here, it sounds, and I want to make sure our understanding is clear. In order for this new development to be part of the Jonathan Association, it will require the Jonathan Board of Directors and the homeowners to have a 2/3 majority vote. So it's not just up to E.R. Horton to say we're going to opt in or opt out. Is that correct?
Right. Yep, the homeowners do have to vote on that ultimately.
So, and then also, because of that, that means that from a use perspective of the residents would not be paying for, just by nature of being adjacent to Jonathan, would not be paying for any of the services of things like the playground, of snow removal, of maintenance of the paths, or anything like that the Jonathan residents pay for in their neighborhoods. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that, because that's going to establish the groundwork for some of the further discussion. Okay. So is there anything I'm missing from a legal perspective that we need to be aware of?
No, I think that's a good summary of
Okay.
the issues.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Liz, it is a large enough group that they could have their own association, is that correct, or no? These houses, just here,
Yep, they could have their own if they wanted to.
if they wanted to. And if the developer chose to push that or have that
Yep.
on, all right.
Okay.
There are trails within the Jonathan area as well. Would they would not be helping to pay for those either. I think it would be hard to prevent people from using a trail system that is close to their home. So that's another issue to think of. If they had their own park, perhaps that would help keep people in their own park, but I do wonder about the trail system.
Technically, snow removal that Jonathan pays for is for the streets and trails, correct? Or is it just a trail?
No, it's just the trails and I believe the alleys.
Kevin?
I'm sorry. I believe in the Clover Ridge neighborhood, the association pays for alley snow plowing, but not street plowing. Streets are public.
Public out there.
Boulevard, tree maintenance, and the common area spaces, the mailbox stations, the community tot lots, and the Jonathan trails, not the public trails.
So there's a mix of them?
There's a mix,
Okay,
correct.
so it's one of those things, there's not, because it's not like there's signs that says there's a Jonathan trail versus a public trail, right?
There's a combination
Okay.
throughout the neighborhood of public amenities and association amenities
Okay.
in the Clover Ridge neighborhood.
Okay, so, and invariably because it's public, I mean, if someone from a different part of Chaska was gonna go into Jonathan, there's nothing to stop, like myself, I don't live in the
Correct.
Jonathan neighborhood, I could walk through the trails, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so, but, okay, but the reality is that anytime anyone's walking through there, they're going through Jonathan, it's a mix of Jonathan public trails, correct, okay. Other questions?
I understand too, if this neighborhood was to become part of the association, that has to get voted on by the association, right?
Correct.
You know what
Yep.
I'm saying? 2/3, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so.
I did have one other thing just
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
trees. You gave, I think, 3 different options of how to help save more of those trees. What about, and this is tedious, but the extent to which within each number you can work in that area to save as many trees as possible? So I know you had said that lot 6 is really full of trees. Maybe we could look at not building there, but, are there other lots where there's, 3 trees that are kind of more over to the side? You could preserve those trees if you put the home here. That's a very tedious one by one process, but it might be something that could be incorporated in along with other options, so.
Yep.
One of the
those
pieces,
are all-
that- oh,
yeah.
yeah, one of the pieces the concept plan doesn't have is the grading elements, which starts to help you understand the three-dimensionality of the plan. Right now, being just a concept plan, you're really looking at it in 2 dimensions, which in some instances may or may not impact how you would evaluate trees. And so you really need that next phase, which is looking at options in terms of grading and things of that to really understand where opportunities might lie. You can identify some general areas to look at and things you might be able to do, but you really need to understand as well what's happening on the site itself.
Liz, could you go back to the slide that showed the tree options? There we go. Just 3 different options to consider, right? So the first option is effectively, pulling the preservation lines, right? So,
It's more or less looking at kind of the overall design of the site. So even in the report, I kind of listed a couple other design options to consider. So it's more or less looking at the layout of the development in terms of how it can incorporate more tree preservation.
so hypothetical, right? And this is, I already know the answer to this question, but just for the audience here is where you have a kind of a foundation. If, let's say the development gets built as is planned, right, as is proposed, and a resident moves into lot 25 and 26, and let's say those guys just really hate trees because it's like, I gotta mow around them and everything. I want to put like a large putting green right down the middle of it, Anything stopping them legally from knocking out every tree out in their lot?
Not unless there's a tree preservation easement over it.
Right. So that goes back to option number 3. Now, how enforceable is a tree preservation easement? From legally speaking, right, we have a tree preservation easement on lots, all the lots there for everything that's preserved. Someone comes, 20 years down the road, forgets that doesn't even know there's the easement, or 5 years down the road, doesn't know because they weren't the original homeowner. And they said, I hate these trees. I'm gonna put in my putting green. Then what happens?
I mean, the city could basically go to the extent of suing them or having them replace what was removed. So it
Now,
could
of
be-
course, these are old growth trees, so if they just leveled them, it would take probably, some of these are 100 years old or, 80 years old, so it would take a long time for them to grow back, right? So it's little recourse from that perspective, right? And it's also enforcement by reporting, so until someone
Right.
complained about it, nothing would really happen.
Right, exactly. It's only if the city is made aware of it.
Okay. Then option number 2, which is deeding the areas to the city. So now basically what we're saying is that we're changing the lot shape, right?
Correct.
So effectively the lots are smaller, but that's becomes effectively an outlot, right?
Right.
Now, under an outlot, if someone says, hey, I'm going to go start cutting down trees,
They'll be trespassing then.
they'll be trespassing on city land, at which point you can press criminal charges.
Right.
Correct? Okay. So, just want to make sure we're all clear on what the ramifications are in terms of what that means. Because I think that, from having kind of read through here and having heard from some of the homeowners that, it's privacy is a concern and preserving some of those trees are a concern, right? Okay. Questions?
I was just going to follow up on Kevin's statement that we don't have a grading plan and so forth. A good number of the trees that are in good shape are on the south edge because they have the most light. When I walked it, which I did, they're going to be right on the pad, and they're going to be in the road, and so they're going to be gone, the ones on the south edge of the trees. And since I'm a tree person, that's really hard for me to say, but it goes back to the fact that we have no idea what the grading is going to be. There is some bumps and lumps in walking it, and there's a couple soggy spots, but, and there's also some very unhappy and damaged trees that probably should come down in this process just because of safety reasons, because they're leaners, hung up leaners, which are deadly. And so I think in one way we are a little bit too early on deciding what trees, where we push the lines and so forth. But I do feel that maybe there should be a few less lots. And I know the developer doesn't like to hear that, but if we're going to really try to preserve some of the good trees that are not going to be on the front edge, because we're not going to be able to do that, deeper into the area, I think we have to encourage some changes in this layout.
The part where you're saying that they wouldn't survive, well, you're talking about the down like lots 8, 9, those lower ones that are circled in the blue, those, yeah, right?
Yeah, these right along, you see that's in the road, All those trees are, in those front edges, yes,
Right.
8 and 9, and 21 and 22 and 23 really have, I mean, there's a lot of trees. And there are some juniors, lots of juniors in there, but there's a lot of, I would say, 80-year-old trees in there.
And what was the property before the Kelsers owned it?
I'm
Before
sorry,
the
what?
current property owners owned it, what was it? This property? It's just all farm, was it always?
Farmland before? It just remained farmland.
Just this
Wood-
grove, yeah.
Probably
So-
woodlot,
Yeah, so it's pretty much, it really hasn't been anything significant in the past 100 years.
not in the past 100 years, it would have been when they used the wood for fuel,
Yeah.
so that's 80-plus years ago.
Okay. Other questions for Liz?
As far as the playground question, and maybe this is for the developer, but where are they at on that? To me, it seems a no-brainer that if they're not in the association, they have to provide a playground. But if they are, do they still have to provide the land for a playground that Jonathan Association runs then? Or do they just get 58 homes get added to the parks that are already there? Usage of the parks that are already there.
Well, if they provide their own playground, they're more than likely going to be owning it
Right.
and maintaining it, yes.
But
In terms of the other, I mean,
are the parks that are existing adequate to take on more homeowners or more kids from these homes, or should there be another park either way?
I think the direction that we're kind of advising them is to look into having their own park. If they decide not to be, if it ultimately is decided that they're not a part of the Jonathan Association.
Okay, what if they decide to be part of the Jonathan Association?
Then they would have access to those Jonathan Association parks.
Yeah, so my question there is, there's still only 4 parks, and now there's.
That would be a discussion point between the developer and the Jonathan Association to
Okay.
evaluate.
So it would be up to the Jonathan Association to make them provide land for a park?
Or pay to do an enhancement to one of the existing parks or something. That would be part of the negotiations, assuming that they could come to a consensus about would they be a entity within the Jonathan
Right.
Association. And so I think until, the board decides whether to hold a vote or not, and entertain that discussion, we don't really know the answers to that. And but they would have a discussion amongst themselves, much like the discussion occurred previously with other areas in Clover Ridge where they'd say, oh, we need a mail station or something because we don't have enough room left in this one, and that's going to be part of your contribution of what you're going to do. And so it would be that negotiation between a developer and a master homeowners association.
So there's no city rules or codes or guidelines being broken or not broken?
Not in relationship to the provision of this kind of common amenity, no.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Liz. So we'll give the applicant an opportunity to speak and talk a little about the development.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Deborah Ridgway with D.R. Horton. With me tonight is Mike Sewell, also with D.R. Horton. Just wanted to get up and introduce ourselves. Being that this is concept, we're looking for feedback we've got feedback from the neighbors, we're looking feedback from the council or the commission on how to proceed to preliminary plat. We do understand the tree preservation issues, and we'll definitely look at the suggestions that staff has pointed out in the report. I don't think there's any deal breakers here. I think that we can work through the details on that. As far as a park, we're going to assess more closely when we come through with preliminary plat a location likely for a play structure for the homeowners. We'll continue to assess the options with Jonathan, but if it becomes too difficult to have it added in, we're not going to be interested in pursuing a 2/3 vote of all the homeowners of Jonathan to be part of that. So, but we're here for any questions. We might not be able to answer all the questions, but we'll certainly try.
Anyone have any questions for our applicant?
I guess I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on, one of the issues that was raised was drainage, and I know we haven't got the elevations yet, so it's maybe premature, but do you have thoughts on how that can be dealt with or even improved with this
Maybe
development?
Mike can speak to that. Mike's the engineer type.
Good evening. During the neighborhood meeting, the residents of the north talked about that they have some standing water and maybe even some water that gets into their basement because some drainage issue back there. And talking with our engineer, we're going to focus to get our waters to go to the south, not towards the north to where there's the water issues that we know about. And then as we work with city staff and the residents of the north, maybe by doing this development, we can provide another avenue for the water in that area to go. I mean, I don't know. There's, as you saw from the pictures earlier, there's 8 to 10 feet of difference between our land and their land, so we have to work through with city engineering folks and our engineers and just see, maybe we can get a catch basin or something back there that can provide an outlet to help their drainage. That's our goal, is to help them, we certainly won't add to them, but our goal is to also help them and maybe solve some of their drainage issues. I don't know if we can, but that's what we're going to try to do.
Okay. Well, that'll be an area that we'll want to look at the next stage, so.
Other questions?
Another question, what is, beyond, possibly doing a play structure, as you talked about, any other thoughts at this stage for that 2.8 acre of park requirement? What's your current thinking on that?
No, originally, we came in thinking that the area was, had more public parks than private parks, and so we were proceeding with the thought that we would do the cash in lieu of park dedication. But that has changed since we found out that a lot of the parks are private and definitely want to provide something for our homeowners.
Okay. Other questions? Guys, thoughts? Heather, Susan? Okay.
I just can't until.
Okay.
We're here for questions.
Sounds
Thank you.
good. Okay, so at this point, we'll open up to the audience. So if anyone has any questions or comments for the Planning Commission or for the applicant, feel free to approach the podium. Please state your name and address.
My name is Shannon Melville, and my address is 2750 Clover Preserve Drive. And I don't know if there's a way to put this on the TV so you can see.
Liz, it's still out of focus right now.
You've got it, too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I just want to see where she's pointing.
okay.
We'll be replacing that camera soon.
Good idea.
Could be in like the next 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to show you with the diagram where my lot is, my home. It's right here. So there's been a lot of talk about the tree preservation and drainage to the north side, but I have the same issues and concerns with my lot. And if you look at the proposal as it is right now, all of the trees are gone that back up to my property. So I have a concern about that. In addition, the drainage issue, so my home sits lower than the woods currently, and our yard, the backyard, is very swampy. We put in our own drainage system with drain tile, and it currently empties into this farm land right now. But we're concerned with a house right next to us, and I think you had mentioned pulling the water from the north to the south, and I'm on the south side, and I don't want any more water in my backyard. We would like to be able to enjoy the yard, and like I said, we've already spent money putting in our own drainage system, and to have more water into our lot, I don't know if our existing drain tile can handle that, and we want to still be able to use our lawn and not have it be soggy after rains and things. So trees, drainage. A huge concern that we have is construction. We have been told that the only entrance and exit for all of the construction is through this dead end here, which will be extended. So all of the traffic will be coming through the neighborhood, which is full of kids, full of families, pedestrians. So they would somehow have to get either from Angler or 100 Mark into our neighborhood and then down this, what's currently the dead end. So if there's a way to have a separate construction entrance, that would be ideal, especially if this is going to take a couple of years.
Okay, and what we'll do is I'll collect these questions and make sure that the developer can come back and address those in one time, so.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think in terms of the parkland, in my opinion, there are enough existing parks for these families to play on. There are 2 parks within 3 to 5 minute walk of my home, plus the Clover Ridge Elementary School park. So I don't know or feel that they necessarily need to have their own park, but I do feel like they should be a part of the association because all of the other homes in this neighborhood are part of the association. So that's
Yeah, thank
what I
you.
have. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so who's next? Someone like to be number 2? We have a pretty full house tonight, so.
So my name is Travis Olson, 1439 Sophia Drive. I know we've talked about the elevation on the plat change to come on the next one, but it really comes down to being able to maintain the properties because we have the, the very long, thin plats, lots set up right now with 22 through 26. And depending on which direction things go, if it stays as it is on the preliminary, we have what is currently the open field that's on the opposite side of where the house is, and it's blocked with the lot of trees. So my concern is being able to, one, maintain that part of their property, if that is their property, and then it comes down to the privacy side of things. The backs of 16 and 17 back up right up to Sophia Drive, and it is obviously, we've seen the plat change. It's 8 to 10 foot elevation change, so those houses are looking directly down into our backyards. So making sure that that is adequately addressed with whatever comes from the next version of this, because as it stands today, it's not acceptable to any of the homeowners that are in the open space between the tree lines.
Okay, thank you. Who's next?
I just have one quick
Yep.
question, if I can get her map up here. I'm Naomi Thompson. I live at 1463 Sophia Drive. As we're talking about this, one of my concerns, if this happens the way that it is here, is all of these people, all of these residents using this little road right here that we use. Sorry, did I talk to, can you hear me? Okay. Using this road here, that's considering, if there are 58 homes, that's more than 100 extra cars on this road, which, by the way, the 2 parks are on this road.
Ma'am, you can just step back a little.
Oh,
further
sure,
from the mic.
I'm sorry. So that is my concern right there. Already, with the deliveries and the garbage men and the whatever that come down our street, there's already so much traffic on this little section of road. So that would be my main concern. And while I'm up here, I did want to thank you for taking the time to walk through our woods back here, because I think some of the photos that we saw tonight show the clearing really well, many shots of the clearing. But they don't show the woods, which in our case was half the reason we bought this house in this spot, was the beautiful woods behind it. And I'm so glad that you all seem to be aware of what we're talking about and the breadth and width of what it would mean to destroy a big section of this. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
My name is Corwin Holk, 1455 Sophia. So I don't want to sound redundant, but I just want to highlight a couple things. And I don't have a way to make this any bigger than this little tiny picture here. This was the 2004.
Actually, it's, Liz, could you just pull up the
That'd be
slide?
awesome. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
You use the mouse to point to it.
So that's pretty clear, right?
Yep.
Um,
You can use
so-
the mouse pointer if you want to indicate
Yeah.
something there.
Sophia Drive, and I can barely see this too, but this is Sophia Drive here.
Yep.
And the original plan, this green space on the drawing is actually titled open space. We are original owners, built in 2004, thinking that this was going to be preserved. I'm not opposed to a development. I just think it's a little unfair to the people that bought into this idea of this being open space in perpetuity, as was presented to us back in 2004. Travis Olson spoke about the lots that back up directly to this development. I'm one of those. In fact, I'm probably one of the two most impacted houses because we back up to the open space. There are no trees behind us. We have trees just to the west of us on a lot behind us. But the two houses that are in the cul-de-sac right now abut directly to our property line. And with the 8 to 10 foot rise, that's going to be a problem from a privacy perspective. The developer did discuss what they could do in terms of elevation. We don't have that plan, but that's definitely a concern for me, that we're going to have people sitting high up, looking directly into our second-story windows. So that's a concern. And then I was interested in possibly, just highlighting to you the importance of, if we're taking out trees, then putting trees back in. So I know there's a plan that the city requires for each lot to add a certain number of trees, but I also think for those people that are on the Sophia Drive that currently don't have that buffer of the natural tree growth, that there's something added back to provide a buffer. It's not going to replace 100-year-old trees, but it would be a good countermeasure to some of the privacy and security concerns that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Number 7.
Okay, can I have the little deal here? My name's Angie Smalley. I live at 1477 Sophia Drive. I was the 4th house on the street. So, and one of the reasons, as Naomi Thompson said, the reason we bought was due to the trees in the backyard. I am this lot right here. I think it was a year or two into living there, we purchased an extra 40 feet of land from the current owner. So, and we have a conservation easement on that. So when you were asking about the ramifications of a conservation easement, it was all written up from a lawyer, so we are not allowed to do anything back there. Right now, it's just the trees right now that every once in a while my daughter will back there, but that's the only thing that we ever do back there. So if you can, this area, as you said, the tree preservation, if you can keep that as a conservation easement in the current owners, when they buy lot 4 as part of their purchase agreement, that would mean a lot to us and also to them. I mean, as a developer, you're going to get more money for a wooded lot. So we do have a conservation easement. It is enforced by us, obviously, but so I hope you can do that for all of these trees and more if you can. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that this is probably belaboring the point, but I am one of those houses as well that bought this. I'm one of these right here. As Angie said, we did uphold what we agreed to when we bought this land. We bought it basically and promised the owner we would never touch it. And that meant don't put a shed, don't cut down a tree, don't put a tree house back there, which is what we really wanted to do, but that's what we promised in order to preserve this land back there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Angela Lallam, 1451 Sophia Drive. We are right between Corwin and another property, and we have a lot of drainage issues. So I think that's really important to address. And I also wanted to reiterate that when we purchased the property, we were told that the space behind us was going to be a proposed park. And so we are definitely surprised that trees will be torn down and homes will be put behind us. So I just wanted to clarify those two things, the drainage issue and then the park situation behind us. With the elevation, I think it's really important that we would have a buffer of trees between us and the development behind us. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm breaking rules by going again, but someone brought up a point that I wanted to mention. I don't know if there's any kind of code in terms of the number of homes on a street, but so right now there are only 3 homes on this dead end, but the proposal is to add another 44 homes, and the only way that they would be able to get out is through this street, and right here, there's a stop sign right here. So I don't know if like I said, if there's some code in terms of the number of homes exiting one street. But I'm wondering if, like rush hour time, if I'll be able to back out of my driveway at 8 a.m. or whatever time if everyone's trying to get out of this street to get to work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Nate Bostrom, 2743 Faulkner Drive. I don't live in the immediate neighborhood, but I've got grandkids who love to walk 4 or 5 blocks over to the playground that's there. It's known as the Ducky Park. And it's a great place. I want to thank the D.R. Horton folks for putting on a very good informational meeting last week, and Liz and Kevin are always very responsive. And in all of that, I just wanted to recite from memory some of the aspects. There is only one park, that Ducky Park, that would be about equidistant from the north 44 units and the south 14. There's quite a few neighbors who make use of that area now. The next one over, closest, would be about a 2.5 to 3 block walk from there. And some of the streets that have been shown, especially that the last young lady shared a number of homes, that looks like an awfully long street. That might be a block and a half in itself. In the Ducky Park, as we call it, there's about 4 swings, 2 of them infant, 2 older children. The facilities are somewhat limited. They're fully used now. All these additional homes that might put a real stress and crowd out the facilities. Also wondering if I've missed it, I apologize, but I wonder if the D.R. Horton folks could share for the first time tonight, or remind those of us who tend to forget, provision for mail stations. At that Duck Park, it has a covered mail station owned and maintained by the Jonathan Association. I don't know that 58 more boxes could go in there. I'm just wondering, again, I apologize if I've forgotten, but I wonder if we could talk about that too. So
I'll make sure we talk about it. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so if I'd like to invite the applicant, well, actually, before I ask you guys back, I think there's a couple questions I have I'd like to ask for staff. Liz, if you wouldn't mind fielding these, or Kevin. One of the questions actually came up, which actually was a good question related to traffic. Is there a requirement to do a fire turnaround in that? So as it stands today, there's no place for a fire truck to turn around, right?
No, they're not showing one, but they will be required to have one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the points.
Right, so that's one of the points that's in there already. And then in terms of the number of homes on the street would be what, if you can answer that question from Ms. Melville.
In terms of code, there's not a code restriction in terms of how many homes are on a dead-end street, but it's something that we can definitely have our engineer look into and address the traffic concerns that have been brought up tonight. So we'll definitely be going into that in more detail with the preliminary, understanding kind of the traffic generations on the site, and have our engineer address them in more detail at that time. So we'll note those concerns right now.
Okay, excellent. And then I think that I'd like to invite the D.R. Horton folks back up to the podium so we could discuss some of the other items and the other questions that the residents had. So firstly on the list I have is construction traffic. Because, there are a lot of children, a lot of young children, especially in the neighborhood. And obviously there's heavy equipment for grading and even construction, transport, lots of stuff going on.
Regarding construction traffic, we're not excited with the construction traffic we generate. I mean, it's a part of doing our business, and we try to limit our routes to impact the least amount of people, but this is tucked back into the Clover Ridge, Jonathan neighborhood, so we'll probably come in off of Engler and come in from the north. The one benefit we have at D.R. Horton is we are both the developer and the builder, so we have ability to do a good job of controlling our subcontractors and the people that work for us. I can't say we're perfect because with Google Maps and everything nowadays, people punch in and when they get in their truck and they start driving and they forget what we have told them, but we'll have a job soup out there on site, so if somebody's not doing good, we can certainly get out there and get them in line, or we'll find somebody else, because we've done enough developments in the past where we've had to go through other neighborhoods, and we're recognized the issues that cause our neighbors when we run trucks through their neighborhoods, so we try to watch our speed, try to control our traffic as best we can, but there's only one public street in each one of these north and south neighborhoods, so that's how we have to come in.
Have you guys looked at a option, looked at maybe, putting in a temporary access through Bavaria or something? There's a farm field there, but renting land.
Yeah, we don't control that property.
Well, I guess the question was, have you investigated maybe renting it out, renting a lane through there or something like that with the owner? Just to throw that out there.
We'll continue to look at that, but there is a creek and some drainage ways that run through there, so I don't know. Because I looked at that after the neighborhood meeting, if there's a way to get to another road, but with the creeks and such in the area, I'm not sure, but we'll continue to look at that and see if there's a way to make it work.
Okay.
Can I
Fair
ask
enough. Yep,
concerning
go
that? Can you go across outlot A, coming into your small development to reach the big development? I don't know how wet that is.
With the grade and the ponding grades there, I don't know if we can. We can continue to look at that and see if there's a way to connect the two for a temporary. Something we'll work with our engineer on is, as Kevin mentioned, we need to add the third dimension to this and see how all the pieces fit together.
So the construction traffic plan is going to be important for this project, for sure. Yep.
I think timing too, time of day, that you'd be moving heavy stuff in and out, and that we're following whatever guidelines there are for that. And if there's not, then we have to be smart about it.
And I believe, but because it's been a few years since I've developed in Chaska, but there is a construction hour limits in Chaska, so we'll hold our contractors to that, and traffic will have to come in during them hours to limit how much we disrupt the neighbors. And then there's no work on Sunday, so they'll get one break, I guess.
Okay. So let's see, what else we have? Sight lines. Oh, sorry, property maintenance. So this question was about the, for example, some of the longer lots that are on the eastern side, for example. That would be the maintenance of those would be responsibility of
The lot owner.
lot owners, right?
And it all depends on which way we go with the tree preservation, whether we put those all in an outlot and deed it to an HOA, say, or the city, or putting a conservation easement on it. Conservation easement would put the responsibility on the homeowner or the lot owner to maintain the grounds.
Okay. That's sight lines. Now, that's a pretty significant one because it's 10-foot difference. That's almost a full story, not quite, right? And so it's almost like having a 3-story building behind your house.
Yeah, and we'll work through the grades again, but we do anticipate adding trees to that north property to create a buffer for the area that's, I don't know if this is
Open.
for the area right now that doesn't have any trees in that area.
Okay. And then, so there's going to be, I think that whether the options of an easement or annexation are going to be kind of an interesting discussion because there's going to be a lot to be discussed there.
Yes.
I guess you guys are looking really excited about that. Okay, so construction, traffic, sight lines. Okay, open space. Now, there was a question about the open space in the 2000 comp plan. This isn't really for you guys, but, you know, Kevin, this might be a good one for you to tackle because you were around back then. I know, not saying you're old or anything, you know.
I was here. The thought at the time of the concept plan for the Jonathan or Clover Ridge neighborhood was that the open space area on the south side of kind of the northern area
Actually,
there.
Liz, could you put back the other slide so we can? Yeah, thank you.
Can you
It's possible
blow
to
that
zoom.
up at all, or?
This is zoom on the bottom right of the PowerPoint. There you go.
Probably not that
A
much.
little too much. There you go.
There you go, about like that.
I think you just maximize the window and you'll be good.
Can you get up to about 200 there? That should do it. There you go.
Yeah, maximize.
We maximize the window because,
See if that sticks.
there you go.
Okay.
And now we can zoom in a little bit more. Yeah, there we go.
You can get it a little bit more.
That's better.
Yeah.
We could probably zoom it.
There you go. Piece. One of the thoughts at the time of when this was being developed is that this area in here, we knew that these trees were not wooded steep slopes, and so they weren't regulatory piece. But there was a desire to preserve them, much like over in the southeast corner of this neighborhood where we did it. In that area, the thought was really the same, was at that time, we didn't anticipate that this would be 2018 when we were developing, that you would have the ability to put in townhomes in this area to make up for the density. Much like that was done over here, is that although you had a larger buildable area, you were able to intensify the area adjacent to it, which allowed you, on a numbers perspective, to preserve the wooded amenities on the site. One of the things that we are looking at now, really with this proposal, is that since that time, since 2000, when this was really developed, that all around this area is developed more fully into single family. We really didn't see the mixtures that were allowed at that time, where you could have seen, much like you've seen in other areas of Clover Ridge, where you had small lots, large lots, townhomes, other things happening. This westerly area pretty much developed as a single family area. Add to that, the townhouse market is still severely depressed. And so trying to anticipate or utilize the notion of density to kind of buy your way out of and preserve an area that doesn't really fall into a regulatory piece seems a little bit harder to do today than it did in 2000 when we were doing other portions of this neighborhood. Now the regulatory pieces like the wetlands in the center and some of the other wetlands, those we were able to deal with much more effectively in the southern area here where we have this treat area. Again, we used density transfer really to deal with how to preserve a non-regulatory upland where you had no wooded steep slope, no wetland that to say you couldn't build there, it was considered buildable, just like this is. It's not a wooded steep slope, so it's a buildable area, but it's wooded with something, a desirable amenity. And so the thought was, at that time, again, to use density to deal with it. But at this point, that seems not to be an option that's available to us in 2018 that was available to us in the early 2000s. And so that was the original thinking of trying to preserve that wooded area. You know, this centerpiece was always known that this was a drainage outlet and there were wetlands through here. This buffer was a piece in the comp plan. This wetland piece here, this wetland piece here, this wetland piece here and here are all regulatory pieces. There's a little piece of wetland here and down in this area, but this wooded area here that we were able to preserve is much similar to this one. And it's not that dissimilar to what is shown here where we have a desire to preserve something that isn't regulatory, where it's outside that area, and we're trying our best to figure out ways to preserve an amenity out there. You can see it even on the west side here where you have this really nice westerly facing slope with oaks and things as well. It's going to be at some point in time another discussion. And so that's the history of why this was shown green, was the anticipation of being able to densify the buildable or the unwooded, not the buildable, but the unwooded portion of this property. But again, that was from a early 2000 perspective and not today's.
Was that green space ever destined to be a park at that time?
Just preserved.
Just preserved.
No different than really this in here. Yeah. It was green, but not from a park perspective. From a city perspective, really, what was developed was that this neighborhood school was placed next to the community park. Victoria Drive was abandoned along this edge here, which allowed the elementary school to flow naturally into community park and to utilize this as the community park for the area. Jonathan Association worked to implement small neighborhood parks over here, here, down here, and right up here, I believe, to supplement kind of the neighborhood functions out there of what typically would be a function of a master homeowners association, which is what they serve for most of this area.
Okay. So just to summarize here, is that the land use plan at the time was built on a model of making economic viability for land use from a development perspective based on a minimum density of homes that would have been met by developing townhomes because they have more units and more residents per square foot. Right.
That was the thought at the time was, okay, if you could have gotten how many units in here, how could you cluster them down as best as you could to try and preserve as much? It's really the same discussion you're having today of how can you cluster things, how can you shape things to minimize the impact. It was just a different way to do that was available to us because of the economy in the early 2000s that is more difficult today.
And what's different is that, certainly the higher density townhouse product is no longer as an economic match for this type of land use at this point, or in terms of, for the cost of land acquisition.
It's different, certainly. Again, at that time, the surrounding areas of Sophia and the areas to the southeast were still just open land as well. And it really hadn't been developed yet as single family. And as you see Sophia fill in and along Clover Preserve fill in as more of a single family neighborhood rather than a mixed residential neighborhood, which is what it was allowed, then it really also kind of set in the pattern of what this neighborhood is, which is more on this side of the pond. It is clearly much more single-family residential than anything else. And this is keeping with what's there. And so it's kind of a balance between multiples of those. And so I think Liz is right in trying to approach this and say, you know, how can you keep with that spirit and intent of trying to minimize to the greatest extent possible and how to prioritize what you're preserving in terms of the woodlands out here.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to invite our D.R. Horton friends back. There was a question about replacing trees that were removed. I think you touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, as we go through the grading plan, as Kevin and Mike mentioned, we'll get a better feel of what trees would be removed. And then once we assess that, we can look at planting back trees that have been removed as part of that. And focusing mostly on that northerly boundary that we talked about, where there currently are no trees. And then in some other areas between the existing neighbors, maybe planting some trees between there as well. On the south and on the north, kind of where the streets come in.
Okay, and then the last two questions were about parks. So one was that, you know, the parks, you know, that there was only 2 parks that were relatively close, but the closest one had only 4 swings. So that was already a pretty constrained park at this point.
Yeah, and again, we'll look at, as we go through the preliminary planning process, the opportunity to put a park in where the best spot might be to put a play structure for the homeowners. So we'll look at that as we move through the planning process.
Yeah, I think the last question was about mail stations.
Yep, and so we would anticipate, post offices today require us to do the CBU cluster boxes, and we do a decorative type box that would be, they're like 16 units per box, so we would find a location. We work with the post office on finding a location along the street where we would put those.
Okay.
And they would be maintained by the homeowners.
So let me ask the kind of question that this is kind of related to the Jonathan question. If the Jonathan is assuming, they're making the assumption that Jonathan does not allow this neighborhood to be in, would you form an association for maintenance and snow removal and things to provide similar amenities to what Jonathan does for these homeowners?
Well, if we do a park, and if it's a private park and not a public park, yes, we would have to have an association. So there would be a neighborhood association. We typically have minimal minimal responsibilities of the association. There's some ARC control. As far as snow removal, we try to keep the cost down for the homeowners. Being that this is only 58 homes, it's important that you try to have the homeowners do as much, like snow clearing on the sidewalks would be the adjacent homeowner's responsibility. We'd probably contract for 1 garbage hauler. So we try to keep the dues down for the buyers.
But it sounds like in order to offer those a single service of, you know, coordinating the trash and having someone pay for the maintenance of the playground set as well as the mail stations, things like that.
Yes.
There would be some sort of association formed in order to organize that.
And the driving factor for this would be if there's a neighborhood park, because that would be a technical common element to the neighborhood. Otherwise, there would be no need for an association.
Okay. Questions? Anything I missed?
Well, one question I have, so would it be, it is D.R. Horton's decision whether to go with the Jonathan Association or not. And then it is your responsibility to set up an association for, like, when people start buying these lots, they're gonna know one way or the other what they're in.
Yeah, and as we go through the process, we're gonna have discussions with Jonathan just to make sure that we're understanding what the process is, and maybe it makes sense to move forward with that. But we need to understand what the restrictions are and what the process is gonna be.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission for further discussion. Folks, what do we think?
Well, this is kind of a technical detail, this is maybe more for Liz and Kevin, but the area is currently zoned rural, but the comprehensive plan, it says guides this area to be low density. So at what point in, you're asking for approval of the development, at what point does there have to be an approval to rezone it?
It'll be done during the preliminary process. So that'll be looked at as a part of their preliminary plat request.
I have a question. We talked about having the city engineer do a traffic study. Perhaps we should make that a condition, add that to our list of conditions.
I think that works. You guys agree?
Can we do that?
I agree, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, because it does look like a lot of traffic, but from a layman's perspective, I'd be interested in an expert perspective on that. Absolutely.
Is there, just to refresh my memory, is there a requirement for a construction traffic plan?
No, but we can make it one, a condition of
Okay,
approval.
should we add that at the same time?
Okay.
I think that some of the key themes that we got out of it were tree preservation, fixing the drainage, and minimizing construction traffic impact were three of the big ones. The drainage one, that one's, the way I'm reading this, and guys jump in here if there's something I'm missing. The way I'm reading this is that right now we're still in preliminary, and just for the audience too, so there's three phases to this whole process, right? So right now we're preliminary, there's a concept. Then we have a preliminary plan which comes next, which after, the applicant goes through, does some modification changes, works with staff, they'll come through and come back with a preliminary. That's the one that should be a lot closer to what we're actually looking at, right? Now that one should have more of the drainage plans, it should have more formal landscape plans in terms of like the streeting, street sizes and things like that should be a lot more accurate. Because if that looks pretty good, then they'll basically come back the following month and then do a final, which if everything looks exactly the same would be in the consent agenda and it would just go right through. Or if there's still changes or tweaks, we'd have one final crack to, make adjustments to that. So, and this is all from a recommendation side to City Council actually does the formal approval. So this is the first of three phases. So that said, the second phase that's coming up next, which is preliminary, will be the one that we'll be looking more closely at drainage. And because at this point, it's still preliminary enough, we don't even know where the lots are gonna be. If we take out like 2 or 3 lots or 5 lots or whatever, it changes everything, right? In a pretty significant way. So there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of figuring out what that means, or if whatever, how that pans out, how it plays out. So drainage was a big one. I'm thinking that this is something we would definitely want to make a big topic on our next review of the preliminary. Right? The preservation of trees. So this is one that seems to warrant some further discussion here. So the preservation of trees, there's 3 different options. There's the option to basically say, you know what, let the homeowners sort of deal with that with the, say identify the trees that are out there and, that's all good. But, kind of here's the line of what the construction limits are. There's the option to deed part of the land to the city. right? Or to have a tree preservation easement where homeowners can't touch it, but technically, you know, I mean, it's still on their property, but they're not allowed to do anything with it. So, now, if I'm also understanding correctly, this is also something where it could be a mix of different options too. So it could be like maybe one section is a tree preservation easement, another section is deeded to the city because it's just, the lots are kind of these weird shapes or something like that, or incompatible shapes or whatever. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, my thoughts are that, you know, all three of those scenarios exist in different places in Chaska, and they all work to some degree. And I guess I would just as soon wait to see what the developer comes back with to see if it passes the smell test when we get it at the preliminary, so.
Is there any guidance we'd want to provide in terms of like some principles that we'd want to provide around this?
Oh, for me, I'm just wondering if we need to go lower density, just given the scattering of trees throughout, and the issue of those homes butting up to the street, and that's where there's a concentration of the very large older trees that wouldn't survive that. I'm just wondering if we can have a view of something that's lower density.
I guess my opinion here is that D.R. Horton and the city, or the staff they've got some work to do yet on all these things, and as Commissioner Keyport said, I'd like to see, we always see something that looks a lot more palatable to us. Usually, we always see, I shouldn't say usually always, but we see something that makes good sense after the staff and the developer have gotten to the preliminary phase, and I think we should run that process.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this concept phase is doing what it's supposed to do. We got issues on the table, and we'll have some very pointed questions at the next phase because we know what the concerns are. So I'm okay with just proceeding to the next step.
Okay. Okay, so I think that just for the matter of record, there's 4 things I'm going to point out as, you know, that things that the applicant needs to focus on. Tree preservation, drainage, construction traffic, and sightlines. Does that sound fair? Any major ones that I'm missing there? Okay.
And I guess it doesn't have to be a point, but I think as long as there's agreement on the park situation as well.
Yep. And I think
That's
the park,
important.
and so I'll add that as the fifth item that we'd focus on is the park. And that's actually contingent upon the Jonathan HOA. Because I think that unfortunately, there's maybe some things that are out of our control because they rest in the control of Jonathan. Right. Okay. That noted?
Yep. noted.
Okay. So, folks, what would we like to do?
I'll make a motion. I've just got to count how many added ones.
We added 2.
2.
Yeah,
We
I
added
think 2, yeah.
Yes. Motion to recommend the city council approval of Sagewood concept plan for at this point, 58 lot subdivision on 28 acres that has a total of 25 conditions.
I'll second that.
Okay. So motion by Cross, second by Dalkey. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So this is moving on to city council. So this will appear in the city council docket on Monday,
May 21st.
Monday the 21st. So what I'll recommend, so I think what I would suggest to everyone here is that mark your calendars for Monday the 21st. I know it's really super exciting to go to a city council meeting on a Monday night, but you know, sometimes there's actually interesting stuff to do. But you know, city council, Monday the 21st, make sure they hear your voices and hear your feedback too. You know, they're also your elected officials from that regard. So they certainly deserve to hear from you directly as well. So this is an important topic to you and to all of us in the community. So I would say, yeah, I would recommend that everyone go to attend that meeting, let them hear those concerns as well, and then certainly I thank D.R. Horton for coming to the community, because you guys build a really, really good product. And I know that you've been really conscientious about what you do. Sometimes it's kind of a little rough to go through this process too, and I appreciate it. But I know that there's homework, and you guys will work hard to do the right thing, so thank you. Okay, so off to our next item of business. Concept plan for Chaska Bluffs Apartments. Well, the room suddenly got a lot smaller.
Thanks again, members of the Planning Commission. We're looking at another concept plan tonight. This one is specifically for the Chaska Bluffs Apartments. So to give you an understanding of kind of the layout of the site and how it exists today, the site is located more towards our southwest Chaska area, right on the southwest quadrant of County Road 61 and County Road 44, also known as Big Woods Boulevard, and Chaska Boulevard, running north to south there on this layout. So the site is highlighted in yellow on this exhibit to show you exactly where it is. It does encompass the existing total loss business as a majority of the site, but in total there are 4 lots as a part of this overall site that they're looking at tonight. Total Loss owns 2 of the lots, and then there are 2 other property owners as a part of this site. So one is owned by the Hagen family, and then one is owned by the Essick family. So overall, it's an industrially used property today. There are 3 different operations though on site. So again, the Total Loss takes up a majority of the site, as you can see here, and their main operation is auto salvaging on that lot. And then as you can see to the south, that is the former Public Works Carver County building, which did come through approvals a couple years ago to locate a potential brewery there. So this site, as well as the site that we're looking at tonight, are zoned the same as restricted industrial, as I'll get into pretty shortly here. So again, the concept plan is requesting approval for 2 apartment buildings on that noted site. One building will be a 3-story, 50-unit building, and then the secondary building will be a 5-story, 156-unit building. So in terms of the use that's being proposed, as I stated, the existing zoning out there is for industrial. However, the comprehensive plan guides the site to be high-density residential. So what they're proposing is in line with the long-range plan for this site and for the downtown master plan as it guides it. So getting back to that current zoning district that it's in, we just like to note this in terms of what the allowed uses out there are today and what that would mean for the site to the south of it, that this site abuts, and hopefully you've had a chance to kind of read through some of the uses that are allowed under this district. It is the only part of the city that it has this type of zoning, so it is a more intense form of industrial use out there. So exterior storage is a part of that, wholesaling, manufacturing, storage, auto and truck sales, and adult-oriented businesses. So just kind of keeping that in mind kind of as we're going through some of the topics tonight. But looking at the existing conditions of the site, so the total acreage of the 4 lots of that site is 10.4 acres in size. Again, like I said, there's 3 different property owners over that site. In terms of what's naturally occurring on the site, they do have a prevalence of wooded ravines and apparent wooded steep slopes out there that they've kind of denoted in the green areas on this exhibit. So as they go into preliminary, obviously staff and the applicant will be looking at that more closely to understand where the edges of these wooded steep slopes are, because that will obviously dictate certain setbacks for the site. Chaska Creek also runs along the west side of this site. It is pretty nestled in there. You can't really see it from the site itself, but something to keep in mind in terms of the setbacks that apply off of that. There's also a regional trail on the north side of Big Woods Boulevard that exists today and basically terminates at the Guardian Angel Cemetery, more to the southwest. So understanding potentials of connecting into that existing system will be a topic of discussion. So here's their concept plan, the way they're proposing it now. So as you can see, the access to the site is in the same position as it is today off of Big Woods Boulevard. That will gain access to the two buildings on the site. The bigger 5-story building is situated on the east side, abutting Chaska Boulevard, and then the smaller building is situated more on the west or southwest side of the site, abutting the wooded steep slope area. So in terms of parking that they're proposing for the site, they are showing both above ground and underground parking for both these buildings. So in total, they are proposing 405 spaces. According to our code, we do require 2 parking spaces per unit, per dwelling unit, so that would amount to 412 parking spaces required for this size of use. So they're just 7 short of that requirement based on the unit count that they have right now and based on the amount of site acreage and land that they have available to work with. It should be something that can be figured out. Getting back to basically that relationship of this site to the old Carver County Public Works site remaining restricted industrial, it does bring up that question of how these uses will interact with each other, how residential will be next to industrial. Typically, these uses tend to be farther away from each other, separated, buffered pretty significantly, and with the unknown of when the site to the south will redevelop, it's hard to say when that industrial use will go away. So with that in mind, if this plan keeps moving forward and gets rezoned to a high-density residential use, and under the understanding that the industrial site to the south will remain for a period of time, we want the applicant to be aware of that and be sensitive to that in terms of the relationship and possible tension between these two uses. So we've kind of noted in our staff report a need for a significant buffer between these uses. Obviously, that will do some in terms of mitigating some of the issues between the sites in the event that the brewery doesn't move forward or doesn't exist to the site to the south. So really capitalizing on what can be done on that southern edge in terms of a buffer, significant landscaping, berming, really maximizing on that potential will be important. Because this is a multifamily development, if you can remember, we did adopt a new ordinance to have multifamily developments, residential developments, or apartment buildings with interior corridors to provide for usable open space on their sites. So the applicant has indicated in their narrative that they will be providing a tot lot, a fire pit and lounge area on the site. So we'll just continue to work with the applicant in terms of what they're going to be providing for usable open space on this site. We did also mention a couple potentials or opportunities that could be further explored for the site in terms of what they provide for usable open space. looking at the rooftop and providing activation up there for a rooftop terrace potentially, or providing something on the ground level on the east side of the site that really takes advantage of those views of downtown Chaska and the river valley, and providing a dog area if this is going to be a pet-friendly apartment complex. So we'll obviously be working with the applicant to really understand the details behind this provision of the site, but it will definitely be something that we look at a little bit further as we get into the preliminary of this submittal. The other thing too, the applicant has been able to secure basically 2 lots of the site, or the total loss areas of the site as denoted in this exhibit. So they have been able to secure agreements on what's denoted in blue, but it should be noted that I think they're still working on securing the other 2 lots, which will be important in order for this project to move forward. From a staff perspective, in order for this to work in a zoning capacity, they will need to secure the entire site and own the entire site in order for this project to move forward. Unfortunately, it wouldn't allow for them to do half of the site and leaving a couple of them for an industrial use. Just in terms of a zoning perspective, that would be very difficult and unfeasible based on kind of the layout of the site. In terms of the overall design of what they're proposing, they do provide for a very articulated design of this building, and from a staff perspective, I think they've provided something very unique compared to what we've seen on other apartment buildings, kind of with the overall layout of the building, with the protrusions and recessions that they're providing in the building. It kind of eliminates that long linear massing that you might see with other big apartment buildings. So they've kind of taken this concept that you can see on screen here in terms of where they're placing pods and orientation of some of the units to create those open areas for outdoor balcony areas for each unit to have. So they are amenitizing kind of those open spaces in between the buildings as much as possible. They are indicating that they'll be using brick, stone, some steel siding, and metal as the materials for this building. We'll just reiterate kind of the notion that we do with any new building in town in terms of meeting our section 9.11 building design and materials ordinance as they continue to move forward. So with what they're proposing, we'll get more information and details as we get into the preliminary. So in conclusion, where they're at with the concept plan right now and what they've provided, we are asking you to make a motion to recommend approval of the concept plan for the Chaska Bluffs apartments based on the conditions that are listed in the staff report. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the applicant is also here as well.
Thank you, Liz. Any questions for Liz?
I have a question. Would any trail connections that they make count towards their open space requirement for multi-unit?
No, it would not.
It would not, okay.
No. So that's a separate component that they have to meet.
Okay.
Liz, just something doesn't match, and that's why I'm asking on the site plan for the large unit. They have as if the driveway to the basement is on both sides. But on this plan, it's only on one entrance. And I'm just saying that may make a difference at that end to the where the brewery is. This is my opinion, and it probably is more directed to the developer. But having a 5-story building really bothers me at that place. I think it's too big. And I have great concerns about the right-of-way for 61. And one reason why they are selling this and promoting it or pushing it forward or whatever is the view of the city. But that steep right-of-way has trees, lots of trees. And I would not want them touched one bit because of the steepness of it and so forth. So I have a concern. I also have a concern of the former use of this site. You do have it listed in your thing about environmental check. I'm worried about grease, oil, transmission fluid, all those things that soak into the ground, that I want that cleared up right away before we get along at all. And I think when they build the garage, they're going to end up raising up the building higher than, you don't see the cars now because they've got that nice little bumper. But by the time they dig up the hole and so forth, I think the building will be at a higher level than like the surface is right now. And that is, again, a concern of mine, looking at the mass of it from 61. And I do see that they have a spot for a potential ponding for the stormwater, but off of two big buildings in that parking lot, there's definitely, it's downhill to 44, and I think that capacity will have to be larger than a guesstimate. I mean, I know that the engineer will do a good idea, but in the concept plan, it's just a little pond.
Okay. Noted, thank you.
Oh, I should say, I do like the fact that it has basically 4 different kinds of apartments. They have efficiencies, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 2 bedroom plus den. And I think that is extremely helpful. But I still don't like 5 levels of it.
Other questions?
I'm assuming, like always, traffic is a big study here, because that seems like a huge new influx of traffic on 61 and 44, I guess it is, right?
Yep, their access is on County Road 44 right now.
Right.
And we understand that there's definitely going to be a shift in traffic generation from where it sits now and what they're proposing. So we will be requiring a traffic study as a part of their preliminary.
Because I think even, yeah, and I suppose it would look completely different, but there is not a great view of traffic. I mean, you know, on going both ways right now, the way it sits. Yeah, it would be tough.
So here's a quick question. What's the requirement, what's the ADA requirement for elevators in buildings?
I wouldn't know offhand in terms of how many or
just that sort of minimum height of building to require an elevator?
yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There is
'Cause
definitely
are these
a
elevators or
requirement.
those, because they don't look like,
They're in the middle, yeah.
well, but the thing is, if you look at like the roof one, the roof elevation, there's no
2 elevator
place
shafts
for them
right
to go
here.
through.
Or, sorry, right here.
Is that because when I looked at it, I thought, okay, maybe that's an elevator, but then when I looked at like, if you look at the roof elevation, it doesn't come through anywhere. But like, when you look at, not the roof elevation, but the upper floors.
Yes, they do. It
is.
Oh, so it does come, it does come through. It's, oh, so it's in like this, it's in a room, it's tucked in an alcove in the middle of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
It's
Okay.
hidden.
So it's not like, yeah, it's not like a large, so it's 2 smaller elevators, really. Okay, got it.
Have to be big enough for move-ins.
Because I thought, when I was looking at it, it kind of looked, because the way it was outlined, it also was marked in blue there too. It looked like it was maybe like like a garbage dump or something through there.
It's gotta be big enough to move stuff into your
Mm-hmm.
apartment.
Yeah, exactly, because it looks like it's a pretty small elevator, so.
It's got to meet code.
Yeah, well, exactly. Okay.
with the requirement for them to secure the entire site, does that need to be listed as one of the conditions?
I believe it is. If it's not, then it needs to be.
It's above, it's in the conclusion. It says or right above the conclusion, it just says they'll be required to secure the entire site.
Or is it in one of the, should it be in one of the conditions?
Right, I don't think I saw it as a.
I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't think I saw it as an actual provision. It's just mentioned under staging and land acquisition, the last sentence.
I think it's something we should discuss as a potential point.
Obviously, since some of our well, my brain isn't functioning. Some of our lovely things that they gave are very old because they've still got 212 and 140 on it. And so somebody has been thinking about this a long time. I just feel that that it still isn't there. You haven't got all the property. You haven't really got a, you've got a lovely, say, okay, you're going to see this from the building and so forth, but I don't feel it's worked up very far. And either they think they're very close to getting the property, or they're just hoping we slip by or something, but I think this is a little bit premature.
Okay, so any other questions for Liz before we give the applicant an opportunity to speak? Okay, thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite the applicant to approach the podium and introduce yourself, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Peter Stolland. I'm the applicant and the developer, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Stelland?
I have a question. Who do you see as the market for these units? Is it millennials and retirees, or is it families with kids, or what do you see as the market?
I think it's exactly that, millennials and retirees. That's what we're seeing in my other projects around the Twin Cities. Mostly families will, if they have a large family, they tend to either try to buy a single-family home or rent a townhouse.
So that, I think, kind of drives the amenities that you're going to see on the site in terms of the green space that we need for multi-units.
Well, the tot lot. I was wondering about that, because they're like two-bedroom, and it sounds like it's more like, you know, singles and retirees, and that didn't fit really to me.
Well, you know, if you have grandkids and they come over, you got a spot. But,
Yeah, or if you have a young couple who just has their first child, you know, they may not want to move right away, right? So it's, yeah.
Yeah, and the retirees want the brewery right next door. I do.
Sir, do you feel that it would not be worth your while to build a 4-story? Or is there something driving it to 5 stories, which seems big for our area?
Yes, the 5-story is appropriate in this project because of the footprint. And in order for a project like this to make economic sense for me, you need density. And in order to get density, you need to go up or out. And if you go out, we've looked at many different configurations for this property, and 5 stories is appropriate. To answer one of your questions, the underground parking garage is totally under grade, so it is 5 stories above grade. But in order to have one underground parking stall per unit, you have to build up like that. In other words, because I don't want to build a project that doesn't have one underground parking stall per unit, and then you have extra outside. So that kind of drives the height and the dimensions of the footprint of the building.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, does anyone have anyone else in the audience who would like to address the planning commission? Please approach the podium and state your name and address, please. And see, oh, coming up.
Somebody has to announce both meetings. I'm Carla Bucinaro, and I live at 3515 Big Woods Boulevard, formerly County Road 140. I totally agree with Commissioner Cross about the concern to the massive size of this project. There's nothing that large out in that area of the city. Even the development across the street from us, I mean, that's fairly new. Before that, it was a big sand pit. I guess for that particular parcel of land, if you wanted to do higher density, I could see starting out with townhomes or smaller apartment buildings, but 5 levels and then another 3 level on top of it, it just doesn't seem like it fits with that area. The other major concern I have is the traffic. I think if I was reading that correctly, that they were thinking about utilizing the current entrance exit to Total Loss Brokers, which would be going on to Big Woods Boulevard. I would invite you all to come over for coffee and tea sometime and sit out on my deck and watch the traffic go up and down the road. I mean, that's a heavily traveled road now. And then you've got 3 developments up here, more to come with the elementary school and all the other development that's coming there. It just sounds like a traffic nightmare. That is situated quite close to the stoplight. As I was going down earlier, I was kind of visually counting, and there's about room for 6 cars between the entrance and the stoplight, and then that's it. And then they wouldn't be able to get out. I mean, to me, if you're going to put something, put it further up on 61, closer to the edge of the property where it would meet the potential brewery in the future. And that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay, we'll bring it back to the planning commission. Thoughts?
Well, I know they're gonna do a traffic study, it's one of the points, and that is sticking out in my mind as a potential issue. Is there legally, or the way 61 is set up, is there any reason that there couldn't be an access also going directly out on 61, having 2 accesses, or is that?
I'd have to go through the brewery.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a couple things. One of them is the wooded steep slope that's present on the the east side of the site there, as it abuts County Road 61. So it would be nearly impossible because of that to get an access onto County Road 61. The other thing is Carver County dictates how many accesses do come off of County Road 61. And I don't think it's in their long-range plans to have an additional access in that area.
Because I was thinking about like maybe making the entrance into the brewery right now, could that be made bigger and have a, side street that goes over to the apartments?
Kind of a frontage road, basically,
Yeah.
Kind of like.
Because I know, I sure get you can't come right down the hill where it is now, but.
So sort of like a frontage road, like where the Quick Trip and the Quick Trip on 41 is? Where the Quick Trip and 41, they have the apartment buildings, the memory care, and the higher end condos?
Yep.
And then there's that frontage road, something like that, is what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a piece that they'll have to evaluate with the county.
Okay.
The county, This abuts two county roads, so
Yeah.
they're going to be having lots of discussions about traffic and traffic orientation with the county. Trying to figure out what's best and what works onto those systems.
I think the other challenge for that configuration too, as I'm thinking about it, is that land is owned by a different landowner, so any access road would have to be like easement or something with that. So that may mess with their ability to put a patio in the parking lot for the brewery. So I know it's a lot of things, but
They can certainly evaluate it and talk to their neighbors and see exactly what's going on.
it's worth exploring the option anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say it's a very large building, as Commissioner Cross said. I think, though, you have to also take into account with the outdoor amenities that will be required, and with the connection to the trail system, having 200 new families living right on the edge of downtown is going to be a real shot in the arm for downtown businesses. That's going to be huge. That's a big deal for the vitality of downtown. So, yeah, it's big, but and I'd be interested really to see, I guess, some more perspective of how this fits into the terrain at the next stage, just to kind of get a sense of that scale. Because you do want the scale to be appropriate. 200 families is great, but if it's really out of scale, we do have to look at that. So, but I'm excited for the opportunity that this presents to Chaska to have that many more families living practically in downtown. So,
Other thoughts? It's kind of an interesting conundrum because, for the longest time, we've been talking about having more foot traffic, more people who have closer access to downtown, and how do you increase the population? Even for some of the shopping amenities, like, Cooper's is one that's been much talked about of recent, right? And Cooper's is the closest store for those 200 new residents would be Cooper's. They'd be closer than anything else that would be built or not built at this time. Almost in walking distance, not quite, but pretty close to it. So, that's a kind of an interesting possibility for some of those businesses. So, what do we think? What would we like to do with this one?
well, I guess I would like to make a motion to approve the PC number 2018-12, the Chaska Bluffs Apartment Concept Plan.
Would we like to add a condition
Subject to the conditions on the back.
Would we like to add one about having the entire site, or having at least some sort of agreement about the entire site? 'Cause I don't think that was in the list of conditions.
Yeah, that's just in the stages.
Well, that I think was in the narrative, that they really needed to resolve that in order to.
It's in the narrative, but do we want to make it a condition?
I think we need to add it to the conditions.
All right, so.
It's kind of, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, right.
Then I'll amend my motion to include, subject to the 25 conditions, with the 25th being what you just described, so.
Mhm. Sounds good. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Keyport, second by Dalkey. For any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
I'm going to say no. I just feel like we're missing too many components to go ahead. And maybe it will be already when the next time it comes around, but I feel like there's too many things missing. So I'll say no.
So dissent by Commissioner Cross? All right, so motion passes. So council will see you on the 21st. All right, so other business. So we had a few items that are a little stragglers that are usually a part of the consent agenda. Was that?
No, it's just how the council has changed out items. Before, you would have these on consent, and you're not really approving other people's minutes.
Yeah.
So it's really, you're being advised of what other people did. And
Okay.
so the council previously would, as one of their consent items, approve your draft minutes. And it's like, why are we approving the planning commission's draft minutes? We should just be accepting them as part of the information, and so they've made that change, and so we've made a subsequent change in terms of how this information gets relayed to you. So you're not approving the council minutes, you're just receiving them.
So is there a, you know, from procedurally, is there a motion that we need to capture, or is it just one of those
No.
things, other business, and then we don't even have to talk about it, it's just on the
It's
minutes?
informational. If you have a question about anything, you can ask it, but that's really where it should belong.
Okay, sounds good, because it's very rare they would ever say, yeah, I really disagree with Commissioner so-and-so. Like, sorry, Mark, I think this was wrong. That was a joke, Mark, if you're listening. So, okay, sounds good. So we want to go around the horn?
Nothing, although I had an opportunity before the meeting to spend a few minutes in the park with Taste of Chaska, so special thanks to the Southwest Metro Chamber of Commerce for putting that on. We dodged a bullet with the rain, and it was an absolutely gorgeous night out there, so.
Well, I think the Southwest Metro did a great job with the weather, too.
Yes.
Yes, well, they handled
But it had a great crowd. It looks like people were having fun, so that's good.
Fantastic. It's great to love the fact that there's a great turnout for these events.